Right, we're back live with you tonight, and let's get into this conversation. Teachers Union Sadtu is worried about the increasing incidents of violence in schools across the country. Incidents of bullying and pupils bringing knives and firearms to schools have been reported. Last week, a grade 10 pupil in Xolani was stabbed to death, allegedly, by fellow pupils. Joining us now to look deeper into this topic, sad topic indeed, is Xolani Fakude, Sadtu's secretariat officer. Xolani, good to have you, and as always, thank you very much for coming in.
Let me greet you, Tibos, let me greet the viewers as well, and thank you for the opportunity.
Expression of sadness, expression of alarm, all welcomed, and certainly something that we would expect you to say. But obviously, expressions of sadness and expressions of alarm are not going to save the lives of our kids. And what is beginning to be encouraging for me is now Sadtu saying schools are no longer safe spaces that they are supposed to be. Yes, there are ills in society, but schools are no longer safe spaces that they are supposed to be, not for the learners and not for the teachers. What needs to be done?
Well, Tibos, I think that firstly, we need to contextualize the issues. When you talk about school safety, there is absolutely no way in which that the issue of school safety and even the challenges, therefore, can only be dealt with by the lead department in basic education, being the DBE. What is very, very clear is that violence, as it expresses itself in various forms within our workspaces as education workers, within the learning spaces of our learners as well, as it expresses itself, it usually has other links which are probably socio-economic, by the way, by their very, very nature. So it's not purely an education matter. But then what we are saying was that our concern as an education workers union, the largest, by the way, is that you've got our profession, a profession in which, by the way, we need to be bringing a huge number of even new teachers into the system to also mitigate with our population growth, our urbanization dynamics, and so forth. But now when we've got this particular profession not being seen as an attractive career anymore, it means then we start struggling, even as a sector, to actually incorporate and even recruit new skill, the necessary skill, by the way, that we need for the fourth industrial revolution. And ourselves as a union Sadtu, we're actually working very hard to even keep young teachers engaged, even through our Sadtu student chapter, because we realize that you are in university at Tibos. What you learn there versus what you then get exposed to once you get into the classroom are two different things. You realize that your lived experience is completely different. But now, Tibos, also what we are calling for is that we believe that it is all about a collaborative approach. As such, we have always mentioned, we have always been emphatic. Actually, I've been here with you as well before, Tibos, and we always speak, for instance, about the I Am a School Friend campaign. It is all about how we bring all sectors of society, all stakeholders, to come and play a very deliberate and proactive role within the education system. In your opening statement, Tibos, you made an example about Xolani High School. Now, you would know that the Xolani incident actually ended up even becoming a racial issue. But now this is the community within which our children should be raised.
What do you do in that instance? Because I mean, I watched that, and it played. I watched it kind of late in the evening, and it played over and over again. And where the MEC allowed the community to engage and have a say. You feel these tensions are actually emanating from the community, and the kids are picking this up. And they are coming into the school. And that is something that needs to be addressed, as you put it, holistically and in terms of collaboration.
In fact, you are correct, it was because the school is the microcosm of society. So the school can only reflect what happens within the very same society where our learners are. So when we speak, for instance, about the ugly head of racism, even beginning to re-emerge in the instance of Xolani, for instance, it means that Tibos, part of what we need to do is to have a consistent conversation. In fact, Tibos, maybe we should even invite your producers to say that maybe we should have a weekly show to deal with school violence in particular, because it is a pandemic on its own. Now, South Africa has got a national development plan. It has got certain objectives, but at the center of those solutions is actually education. That is why for the longest time it has been seen as an apex priority. But now what then becomes a necessity as well is for all of us, multiple sectors of society, to take responsibility. For instance, Sadtu right now is working very closely with a corporate partner, a metropolitan, whereby actually we are going to be keeping the conversation going even at the local level. Because we feel, Tibos, that we should not wait for an incident on Facebook for us to end the conversation. Let's be consistent.
That's what that community is feeling. That community felt as if, I mean, the time that they saw the MEC now, who is, by the way, the new MEC, that school had been abandoned. They felt like, well, the last time you were here was when there was an incident. In fact, this is what one of the learners said. When the last time you were here, it was because there was an incident. You are back again because there's an incident. So it looks like the only time that the school is being given some kind of attention is when there is an incident. Of course, MECs have got a lot of commitments and things that they need to do. You cannot be looking at one school all the time. But as you put it, there needs to be an intervention that is ongoing in each and every one of our schools that is able to address this issue.
You're absolutely correct, Tiwos. And it is also about communities taking ownership of the schools. We always argue as a union that, for instance, the criminals that go into schools, in Gauteng, just during the festive season alone, 92 schools were vandalized. Now, when those criminals come in those schools and they steal those electronic boards, for instance, we are trying to have e-classes now. When they steal them, they actually sell them, resell them in the very same communities. So we are saying that we need to have a situation whereby communities take ownership of the schools. But then it also has to do, Tibos, with a complete paradigm shift. We always make an example that in South Africa, when we've got community protests, the school is going to be seen as the lowest lying fruit to use as a bargaining chip. So that you want to advance your issues about electricity, for instance, you shut down a school. But now it tells you that then we need to have a paradigm shift. We need to be honest, by the way, and be very deliberate about the conversation. And what we are calling for as a union, part of it is that let there be parental involved, increased parental involvement. Let there be adequate psychosocial support services to support the teachers because of what the teachers are exposed to.
I want to specifically, I want to deal with the safety. Let's come to this issue now of dealing with the social psycho problems. And we need to be honest here. Are teachers equipped to be able to deal with the mental challenges that children are bringing to school these days?
Actually, you're asking a very important question, Tiwos. As teachers and as educators, primarily our function, what we are trained to, is to deliver the curriculum and the assessment part of it. But then the socio-economic conditions and reality of South Africa are such that it then burdens the teacher with also those additional responsibilities. We are in overcrowded classes, by the way. Not only are we in overcrowded classes, but when you are a teacher, you know that not only are you delivering the curriculum, but teachers, Tibos, you are also a social worker, you are also a nurse, in some instances, you are probably also even a sangoma, you are whatever you can be, because you now, the learner sees you as a parent figure because of the challenges and the kind of households that they come from, which therefore tells you that we need to have a collaborative effort even within the government itself. The Department of Basic Education needs to have a particular target that they must reach jointly with the social development, jointly with health, as to how are they going to avail psychosocial support services and NGOs as well. Let also the private sector come in. We are, by the way, calling for Tibos that we need to fund the infrastructure. When we talk about safety infrastructure in our schools, we've got the National Safety Framework. It needs to be implementable. It can only be implementable if it is resourced adequately.
So how does it happen that we've got so many schools that need clearly a present social worker that is resident there, and you've got a lot of graduates, social workers who are sitting at home and they are unemployed? Talk to me, how does that happen?
It's absolutely frustrating, Tibos. In fact, not only when you talk about psychosocial support services, in the entire public sector, we speak about a public service that is not capable of absorbing the kind of skill that it requires to respond to our population dynamics. Not only is it about psychosocial support services, many unemployed remain social workers, many unemployed nurses as we speak, many unemployed, newly qualified teachers as we speak. But yet we know that we've got a situation in which education workers face overcrowded classes. So now this is where now society must come in. Let us also hold those in government accountable to say that why are we seeming to as if we are implementing austerity measures in public services, probably through the back door without a public mandate.
Yeah. One is the infrastructure, of course. I mean, if we are talking about protecting, for example, our national parks and protecting wildlife that is becoming extinct, we should even more so feel we need to be protecting our children. So access control in our schools clearly has got to be something that is prioritized, especially if a man in Kagiso allegedly went into the school, took hostage of some staff members there, stabbing some teachers and so on and so forth. I mean, that tells you that access control was lacking there.
Absolutely. In fact, access control is one of those critical elements as identified by the National School Safety Framework. A policy instrument which we all agreed on is very nice. It sounds very, very proper if it were to be implemented. But now the question is, do you resource it adequately? Do we resource it adequately such that schools can even move beyond their norms and standards, budgets, for instance, and be able to have adequately trained security officers at the access points? Are we able, in some instances whereby there are high incidents of crime, for instance, are we able to have even metal detectors? But now all of those are related to how we then fund education. That is why Sadtu has been very, very insistent on how we should even look at the actual funding of education, including education infrastructure. We are told year in, year out that education gets a very big slice of the national fiscus. But in reality, we would argue otherwise as such, and tell you that actually the budget is even declining, by the way. And as such, it affects the kind of education infrastructure. It even affects, by the way, our morale as education workers. Yeah. When we speak about infrastructure, it's not only security infrastructure, we still have got pit latrines. Yeah. There are teachers in the Eastern Cape who still go to pit latrines. Yeah. It cannot be, and learners, by the way, so it cannot be acceptable.
Let me tell you this, I'll make that commitment to you, at least for now, to say I'll bring you back and we will tackle this once again. And I'm hoping we could possibly start maybe here in Gauteng, get the MEC in with you.
Absolutely.
So that we can tackle this issue bit by bit, start with this issue of safety, move on into psychosocial services, move on into other laws that, of course, are dealing with those who are predators within the system. So it's a broader conversation, and I take your point that we do need to focus on it quite often and break it down. That is Xolani Fakude, Sadtu's secretariat officer there with us, delving deeper into some of the concerns that are raising violence in our schools.